Namaste, everybody. Welcome once again. And today
Namaste.
with Achala ji. And the last time we did a video on healing Venus in your chart. Today she is back, and we are continuing with the series on healing your grahas in your natal chart. So today she's come up with Moon. So Achala ji, over to you. So how can we heal our Moon in our natal chart?
Namaste, everyone, and namaste, Dr. Pai ji. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm always very honored to be here and also always very eager to hear your insights as well. So since last time people seem to like the video, I thought it would be really nice to just bring more about different planets. Some people even suggested that in comments, just a little bit about each planet. How can we heal it in a simple way, in a way that is accessible to anybody in any form? So I have a little presentation here, or just I would just need your permission, Dr. Paiji, to share the screen.
Yeah, you have the permission now.
Okay. Oh, okay. I see it now. All right. So I'll share my screen now. Okay. So today, a little bit about the moon. And I thought it's nice that we actually continue with the moon because both Venus and Moon are two planets which are somehow similar because obviously both are watery planets, but they are also different in their own ways. And sometimes it's not like 100% clear to some people to whom I'm speaking to, like what's the actual difference between Venus and Moon and how can we approach them differently? So I thought that Moon is a nice one to continue with, so we can also tap into that subtle differences between Venus and the Moon as well, and what do they represent. First of all, Moon is much more, how to say, a much more childish planet, almost you could say, because Venus is rajasic, Venus is passionate. Moon, on the other hand, is sattvic. And Moon is also ruling the original fourth house, the sign of Cancer, which is the sign of the mother, but it's also the sign of our inner child, actually. Because quite honestly, depending on how was our relationship with our earthly mother right here, right now, in this particular lifetime, of course, it is going to impact actually huge area of our life. First of all, it is going to impact how well do we respond to and how do we react to those experiences in life, especially that make us feel very vulnerable in some way. And do we react to that, with a sense of love and embracing the situation? Do we try to nourish ourselves, or is there some fear, aggression related to those experiences, etc.? So Moon is pretty much, representing this inner child and how this inner child was well taken care of in our early life and in our later life as well, because so many things truly depend on that. And of course, because of that, Moon is also known as representative of our self, of our mind. But this is also one more thing where people get puzzled sometimes, actually, because when we are talking about the mind, the first thing that actually comes to our mind is the intellect, is the intellectual side of our mind, the analytical one, the thinking one. And that's actually not the Moon at all. Moon is not analytical in nature. He does not represent intellect in his nature. There are other grahas that, let's say, reveal this part of ourselves. Moon is actually specifically this emotional side of our mind. And Moon is showing how we receive things in our life. How do we welcome them? And how do we welcome new experiences, especially? Do we welcome them with curiosity, or do we prefer to stay in our comfort zone? Moon has a lot to do with how do we, perceive our comfort zone, how it is, how nourished we are, how accepting we are to everything that happens in our mind. And one metaphor that I always like to use to, in a way, portray the difference between Moon and Venus, both of them represent water. But you can think of Venus, actually, since Venus is passionate and always, you could say, flowing towards a certain goal. Venus is a little bit more like a river. You know, it has a beginning, it has an end, it has a very specific goal, because every river always wants to rush towards the ocean. Moon is a little bit different. Moon also represents water, but more like ocean, which is kind of all-encompassing, which flows in all directions, but also has waves and its ups and downs, you know. Sometimes it's very happy, sometimes it's very sad. Moon is like literally this side of our mind that goes through these upside downs throughout the day. We can wake up in a very good mood, but by the evening, we can already be in a very bad mood. It can change very, very quickly and very, very swiftly. Also, Moon represents how do we deal with this present moment? Do we just embrace the experience? Or do we try to intellectualize it? That's a very common, you could say, coping mechanism in our times. We try to understand everything, intellectualize it, etc. We rarely just stop and just try to feel and try to kind of sense what the feeling is telling us, simply speaking. And that is also something really valuable that Moon teaches us, because that's how we were as children. When new experience was coming into our, let's say, space, we would just react to it in the present moment, the way we felt it's accurate, of course, as a small child. And then we just move on. We don't hang on to it. We don't attach to it. We just embrace it for what it is. Because that's also how healthy mind should be. It should allow all the experiences to just come in the same way how the clouds are passing through the sky without stopping them from coming, but without hanging onto them either. Just embracing whatever comes with curiosity, acceptance, and love, of course, knowing that there's some higher force behind all of that. So similarly, like we were talking on a previous session about these three modes of Venus, how Venus manifests when it's tamasic, when it's rajasic, when it's more sattvic in nature. I think it's a good way to look in the same way at all planets, because everything that is existing in this universe goes through these three modes of nature. And specifically, if we think about the moon as our inner child, depending, of course, on what we were going through in our childhood, what type of karma that we brought with ourselves, this inner child will have different things to cope with, you could say, in this lifetime. For example, when the moon is more in a tamasic mode, there can be a lot of problems with, how to say, accepting rejection, you know, so-called rejection trauma, when this inner child is rejected, and then we feel isolated and we feel alone, and we feel we kind of cannot connect to others. This is actually most of the time coming from moon, in fact, because moon's influence when it comes to how we relate to the world and how our relationships with other people are, is really not to be underestimated. Even if we actually look at the houses in Vedic astrology, we can clearly see that connection, that the way how we were nourished as a child in early childhood will inevitably, in this way or another, impact our relationships later on in life. This is why the seventh house, house of relationships, actually happens to be the fourth house from fourth house, which is the fourth house of this, you know, our inner child and how our mother was loving us and how we were treated as children. For example, whenever you were crying as a child, did you receive an embrace? You know, were you comforted in some way? Or were you said to just, you know, grow up and move on? Were you screamed at, maybe? Or maybe you were ignored and rejected. That would be more tamasic, you know, and passive way of experiencing that. And of course, especially when our parents are going, you know, through something themselves when we are born, then we can often, you know, experience that sort of sense of isolation, separation in early childhood, which leads us to this like rejection type of feeling, which later on in life can really impact us a lot and really have quite negative impact on our relationships. Because the truth is that as long as we don't somehow accept and embrace ourselves, it's really hard to also receive acceptance and love from others, because you will always doubt, is it actually real? Because there's no space for that yet in your own mind, in your own universe. Therefore, it cannot happen because you did not allow it to happen in a way. This is why also it's quite fascinating that if we look at various afflictions that different planets can go through in a birth chart, actually Moon can go through biggest amount of afflictions, I could almost say, which quite clearly shows how vulnerable planet is that. Because it is a planet of our vulnerability, of our sensitivity, and if it was somehow mistreated early on in life, it will take a little bit time to rebuild that, and it will take a little bit of our own mindful awareness and attention to really embrace, once again, those rejected parts of ourselves. On the other hand, if we look at the Rajasic moon, something completely else might manifest. Tamasic moon, for example, will have a little bit more tendency towards isolation, actually. This is how it will react to most life experiences. Isolation, even denial. Rajasic moon is a little different. Rajasic moon is all about, this constant need and desire to experience, the closeness with others, to express its sensitivity, its creativity also, because moon is such a creative planet, of course. But when moon becomes overly Rajasic, it can become too needy as well, too clinging to different experiences. It may literally cling, to either relations or some ideas, or some of our own projects, some of our own creations. There might be this aspect of clinging to things and very strong attachment. On the other hand, when moon is satwik, moon will be much more in the mode of acceptance. But not acceptance in a way, like something sometimes happens in our lives, not the way we would like it to be, but we know we cannot do anything about it, so we just say, whatever, I accept it. It's not this type of acceptance. It's like really true, wholehearted acceptance, embracing the situation, not because you are completely helpless and cannot do anything to change it, but because you truly realize that actually there is some divine force acting behind our life. There is a reason why everything is happening. It's like, a little bit like, again, a small child. When a small child has this, let's say, very healthy, very strong relationship with a mother, then there is this trust that mother will always take care and that mother is always doing what is best for her child and that she is doing her best. In a similar way, we can also develop this state and this understanding that whatever happens in our lives is already taken care of, Divine Mother. And we can trust God, we can trust the universe from that level, from that perspective, which gives obviously so much more freedom, because the moment we realize that there is a higher force involved, that this whole creation is Divine Mother herself, of course, from that level, from that perspective, it's so much easier to not take things personally in the first place. That's also always the biggest weakness of the moon. It takes things way too personally. It always kind of revolves around its own experience only. But once we kind of expand our thinking a little bit, it's much easier to accept and understand that whatever is happening is for sure happening for the highest good. And this is why I believe the Adidevata of the moon was known as Divine Mother herself, Goddess Gauri, the bright goddess, the one who is very soft, very gentle, very vulnerable, very pure as well. Mother Gauri is actually such a special form as well of the moon, because Mother Gauri truly, represents this very pure side of ourselves. It is believed that she actually went through a deep tapasya, that originally actually the goddess was born with dark complexion, but then she went through tapasya to become worthy of having Shiva, God himself, as her husband. And of course, once she went through that tapasya, actually her dark, you could say, covering just dissolved, just disappeared and vanished. And she became very, very bright, like the moon, which of course represents the purity of the mind itself. And knowing that, white color, of course, is also very associated with the moon, it's quite significant because white color, on one hand, it's, of course, the most pure of all colors, but it's also the easiest color to be stained at the same time, the easiest color to be impacted by any other color, by any other tone. And our mind is pretty much like that. It's like pure, blank white, paper when we are just born as children. But then whatever impression gets imprinted out there, sometimes there might be so much of these impressions and so much of these colors that we forget that still somewhere behind all of that, there is this pure white canvas that we can still access and that we can still connect with. And that's actually, what true, pure and this satwik moon, how he would be, how he would behave. Of course, we don't maybe see many manifestations of true satwik moon in our times because moon gets so easily affected by the company of the planets he's with. Even when moon is seated in a sign of a planet, moon gets so much impacted by the very qualities of that planet to a higher degree than any other planet, in fact. And of course, that for us is also very important information because it reveals and shows that moon, representing our mind, gets very easily impacted. And as long as we don't work on either keeping this moon as white and pure as possible, keeping this mind, as empty of negative impressions as possible, or even going one step farther and replacing those negative impressions with positive ones. Because that's the thing with the moon. It's actually even the part of body it represents is the mouth. It even gets exalted in the sign of Taurus, which represents the mouth of Kala Purusha. Because it's all about nourishment, but also moon is constantly consuming. It's not just the food, physical food that we are talking about here. Everything can become the food. Whatever we hear, whatever we see is some form of food for the mind. And depending whether we feed this mind with tamasic, rajasic, or sattvic content, that's how our mind inevitably is also going to be. Because one thing that we cannot forget as well is that moon in reality, being a satellite of our Earth, it actually does not have the light on its own. It reflects the light of the sun. That means that moon has this fascinating capacity to reflect the light, reflect whatever we project on it. And this is also why it's so important to, from time to time, remind ourselves that this moon, in its very essence, is truly just like a mirror. And whatever we put in there, it's going to be reflected to us in the outside. It kind of works both ways. On one hand, the moon is like a mirror that reflects everything from the outside, intakes everything from the inside, but it also projects everything back as well. So it's a very, very, very special planet and very vulnerable planet. Not without a reason, I would say, there is always so much emphasis in the scriptures put on the afflictions on the moon specifically. Even whenever there are certain afflictions in the chart, through also some sensitive points, through some avastas, it's always stressed that especially when moon goes through those afflictions, it's always going to impact us the most. Because moon is, this part of ourselves truly with which we identify ourselves really the most. It's this emotional, personal side of our mind. And similarly, like with Venus, of course, every planet can go through different blockages, different problems. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about different avastas of moon here. I remember that under the last video, there was these questions, are these the only avastas, that a planet can go through? Of course, they are not. There's quite a variety of different avastas of states that planet can go through. But of course, on purpose, on these sessions, I am specifically bringing in those avastas that I find to be quite problematic whenever a planet experiences that, just so you can pinpoint it more easily in your own personal chart. So similarly, like we have ashamed Venus, which was ashamed to express love, and which could create also some feeling of shyness or shame around the topics of relations or sexuality, we can also have a shamed moon in a chart. And just as a reminder, a planet becomes ashamed primarily when it's conjunct either by Rahu or Ketu. And moon being very, very sensitive when he's getting conjunct with any of his nodes, of course, he gets quite powerfully impacted by them. Out of the two, Moon is suffering a little bit more when he's in conjunction with Ketu, because Ketu is just radically different than Moon. Moon is all about finding nourishment. Moon is all about finding peace of mind really in life, and Ketu is a complete antithesis of that. Is the karaka of transformation, separation, liberation, even. So of course, when Moon is being close to Ketu, he suffers quite a lot, and especially the sense of isolation might be very strong with the moon. With Rahu, it's not that much. With Rahu, it might feel that moon may become sometimes even overly emotional or overly clinging. So moon may go a little bit more to this Rajasic side. But in any case, when the moon is ashamed in a birth chart, maybe the way how we are dealing with it externally can be a little bit different, but there might be actually some form of shame or shyness associated with our childhood or with our early life. Even scriptures go as far as to say that whenever Rahu is conjunct with a moon, that there is certain possibility that a child was born as a result of rape, in fact. So there might be certain aspect of violence even connected to conception itself. So of course, whenever moon is ashamed, there might be some things, especially in our early life, very often so early that we don't even remember it, or we don't even know about it in a way, that can somehow impact us negatively, even without our knowledge. Of course, the complete opposite of that would be the proud moon, which is the exalted moon primarily, or moon in Mula Trikona, but it's the same for moon. It's whenever he dwells in the sign of Taurus. And proud moon is very different because he goes a little bit more, towards this Rajasic side. Proud moon really, loves to be nourished, loves to stay in his comfort zone, because of course it's not without a reason that moon is exalted in, you could say, the most stubborn of all signs, for sure, the sign of Taurus, but also the most fixed and stable of all signs, because it's an earthly sign and it's fixed at the same time. So there's a lot of stability out there, and moon feels amazing there because, of course, our mind itself loves stability, right? It loves when we are stable, when we are in our comfort zone. It doesn't like when we are going through transformations, which is the opposite, which is the sign of Scorpio. But also when moon dwells in the sign of Taurus, of course, sometimes it may generate too many desires as well, because sign of Taurus happens to belong to Venus in this case. So moon becomes very much colored by the energy of Venus when he's dwelling in the sign of Taurus. And not only that, sign of Taurus is also Rajasic in nature. So moon becomes really Rajasic. He wants to cling to things, collect things, keep things, always. Can be very creative, of course, as well, and give us many other beautiful qualities. But the problem of that moon is that sometimes it might be too much into, into its own beliefs and into what it thinks it's right. And it's actually not also like the most nourishing placements for the moon possible, to be honest, as well. Sometimes moon in Taurus can become pretty materialistic also. And it can really become, the mind may really flow too much into the outside. in a way. The moon can also be agitated in this state known as Kshobita Avasta. And this is happening very often because, of course, moon is traveling quite fast through the whole zodiac. And when moon is agitated, the easiest way how it can happen is when he's being combusted by the sun. That actually happens during the time of new moon, primarily. So it happens around this time of new moon, starting from Krishna Chaturdashi Tithi, and it ends only somewhere in the beginning of Dvitiya Tithi, when we can finally see moon once again after its time of disappearance. When moon is in this state of agitation, it disappears entirely into the sun. And I would say that for moon specifically, it's a very interesting situation to happen because moon represents divine mother, divine feminine principle. It's a feminine planet, same like Venus. Sun represents divine father or masculine principle. So when moon disappears into the sun, first of all, it might show that also our mother might have been in some way overshadowed by our father in our early life. But also how it shapes our personality later is that regardless whether we are born in a body of a man or a woman, the masculine qualities within us will be somehow stronger, and they might dominate the softer, kinder side of ourselves, which moon represents. We might even negate the value in vulnerability, in fact, and we might start valuing only qualities like strength, endurance, rather than vulnerability, sensitivity, compassion, etc. So especially when moon is in this state of agitation, it can be problematic in this sense. Moon in state of agitation will also have tendency to isolate itself a lot. And especially for ladies who have this placement, who have this agitated or combust moon in a birth chart, I would say that it's really vital to, start appreciating also the feminine and embracing truly, the feminine side of themselves, because it can also negatively manifest in relations, especially for ladies. They may actually end up in relations in which they will be also dominated as well, because something was not healed inside, simply speaking. Moon can be also in starving state, like every graha. Grahas usually go into this starving mode when they are conjunct with Saturn. It also happens when moon is when a graha is in general in an enemy sign or conjunct with enemy, but the thing is that moon doesn't really have enemies, moon does not perceive any other planet to be an enemy, which also tells so much about our mind, that mind in its pure innocent state, it doesn't really see, the planets as friends or enemies in a way. It's just curious, like a child. But still, when moon is conjunct with Saturn, it's of course not an ideal placement for the moon, because moon might not mind Saturn, but Saturn definitely minds the moon, and that's where it's problematic. Saturn is literally the most, you could say, dry planet of all, and pretty much an antithesis of the moon as well, because moon is all about innocence, curiosity, sensitivity, vulnerability. It values things which are romantic, creative, soft in some way, while Saturn really is all about this raw reality of life, So when we are putting these two planets together, of course, moon is going to suffer. He is going to suffer in such a way that Saturn also may overshadow the moon to a certain extent, especially when Saturn is strong. He kind of dries up this moisture, this water element from the moon, which is why, especially when a planet is in this mode of starvation, in Kshudita Avasta, it's actually the hardest for moon or Venus to experience that. And even harder for moon, because moon is actually Saturn is the enemy of moon. And because these are watery planets, of course, it really like dries them up to a certain extent. Moon can be also dormant or asleep when he's in a state of debilitation. And of course, when moon is dormant or asleep, very often how it just manifests in the outside is that we just do not know yet, or we didn't learn yet, how to deal with emotions, especially difficult ones. That's a very, classic example when moon is in some form of dormant state of lacking some part of emotional education, like how to deal with a difficult emotion when it comes. That we don't need to respond, to it with aggression. We don't need to respond to it with fear. We don't need to respond to it with any of those problematic feelings. Dormant moon tends to awaken those feelings because dormant moon in general has quite low level of tolerance when it comes to stress and difficult experiences. And then the moon can be also in a dying state. Also a puzzling state for the moon, you could say, because moon is a child, and when moon is in a dying state, when it's close to the end of a rashi, when it doesn't have much of its own energy, in Mrita Avasta, then this part of ourselves, which should be child, which should be spontaneous, it become an old man instead. And of course, when something like that happens, it's like, you have, for example, many of these people, who sometimes come for readings and they say or confess that they feel, like they didn't really had childhood. They needed to grow up very quickly. Starving moon, so moon conjunct with Saturn, will give a very similar effect. It like takes away some part of our childhood, simply speaking, and makes us develop other qualities very, very fast. So that's actually the thing with moon, that when he's generally in close conjunction, especially with any of those Krura grahas, Rahu or Ketu, also Mars, or in the sign of Mars, or with Saturn, even with Sun, kind of part of its own sensitivity is being lost. It's like you would put in the same room two people. One, imagine, is incredibly emotional and sensitive and incredibly vulnerable, and another is just cruel, because that's how these planets are. They're cruel to the point and everything. Probably if you put these two people in a room and if they go into conflict with one another, the vulnerable one will just end up crying, sooner or later, simply speaking, because it does not fight those influences. It just welcomes them, of course. So, of course, when the moon goes through those avastas, it can be problematic for the moon. There are plenty of other ways also how moon may experience affliction, but these are just the most common ways, the most common modes that moon can experience in a birth chart. And when it comes to uplifting the moon, it really comes down to healing this inner child of ours, I personally believe. And there are, of course, many ways to approach this topic. The most simple thing that we can do always is to just meditate with Divine Mother, with actually any aspect of Divine Mother that we feel close to, that we feel that is close to us in any form. This can be also the aspect of our physical mother, it doesn't matter, but somehow to connect with this divine aspect of the mother. So she can teach us actually how to take care of this inner child. There's this one really beautiful technique that actually my Gurudev has taught quite a few years ago, a very beautiful meditation, which is also very, very simple, in which you simply visualize yourself as if you are sitting in the lap of Divine Mother. And you just visualize that. Visualize Divine Mother in any form you want. But the thing is that as you visualize her and you feel yourself sitting in her lap, try to truly feel like a small child with absolute trust, absolute acceptance. Like when you're a small child, you don't worry about anything either, right? You kind of know that the mother, she will take care of everything. The small child doesn't worry, will I have something to eat? Will I need to do this or that? The mother takes care of everything. And sometimes coming back to this state and reminding ourselves of that state can help us also to take it later to our everyday life. Because I strongly believe that this is the part of ourselves that we actually do miss in our everyday lives as well. Because we so rarely allow ourselves to just trust this divine force. And I think that we do not allow ourselves to feel that because there's one feeling which we as humans, we really do not like, and that's a feeling of helplessness. And that's not an easy feeling to embrace truly, but even in Bhagavad Gita itself, Lord Krishna quite a few times stressed out that beings are in their essence helpless, in fact, because the divine is steering everything. And it's not a bad news, it's a good news, because it means that everything always goes to the right direction. It's exactly how it's supposed to be. And sometimes the best thing we can do is really just to trust, no matter if we cannot always understand it with our mind, with our intellect. Also, one really beautiful mantra to Divine Mother, which was in fact given by Goddess Lakshmi herself and is one of her names, is Om Chandraye Namaha. It's a 6-syllable mantra, very simple. But here, Chandra in this mantra is not masculine, it's feminine. And Chandra is actually one of the names of Goddess Lakshmi. And she was specifically worshipped by this mantra by sage Vashishta. And she says that whoever is experiencing any form of turbulence in the mind and just chants this mantra a few times, the peace of mind will come back again. And she even said, that she is called Chandra, or she is called the moon, because in the same way how the moon rose above the Milky Ocean after the process of turning it, in the same Goddess Lakshmi also rose. In the same way how moon represents all auspiciousness in its fullness, Mother Lakshmi represents exactly the same thing, exactly the same quality as well. So if we chant this mantra to her, we can even visualize a beautiful, white, bright, moon-like light in our hearts and truly feel how it pacifies us from within. Of course, moon is also very strongly connected to Lord Krishna because among Dashavatars, among the incarnations of Lord Vishnu, moon specifically represents Krishna. And it also makes so much sense because Krishna is actually one of the few avatars who is worshipped even as a child, and he is actually more loved as a child or as a teenager than in his later years. People love so much Balakrishna or Krishna in this playful form when he was stealing butter from the gopis, where he would play with them or play his pranks on them. Because he truly is this avatar, you could say, of divine playfulness within us as well. This spontaneity that we hold inside. And of course, whenever we want to awaken this a little bit more, whenever this spontaneity and curiosity and just playfulness of a child kind of evaporated from within us or was dried up, we can always connect to Lord Krishna and he'll always help us as well. The simple mantra that we can use to Lord Krishna that is quite nice for the moon is Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha. Klim specifically is a beach mantra of desire, but it's also a beach mantra for water element as well. So whenever we chant Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha, we also heal this water element within us. So instead of actually being overwhelming for us in any form, it starts becoming rejuvenating and it starts flowing smoothly without obstruction. Of course, also, since Lord Krishna given this wonderful scripture, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, whenever our mind is particularly disturbed, we can also simply read Bhagavad Gita because that is his teaching. And Bhagavad Gita is especially recommended for people who have a little more severe afflictions happening on their moon in their birth chart. of course, Bhagavad Gita is recommended for everybody, and for everyone, but especially when moon is really afflicted, when it's really disturbed. It's so beautiful to read Bhagavad Gita because the very first chapter of the Gita starts with Arjuna being in this actual state, complete agitation, frustration, depression. And then throughout the chapters, especially first 6 chapters, Lord Krishna actually tries to get Arjuna out of this state with many different ways. And he takes so many different approaches. But especially in the second chapter, Lord Krishna truly, puts things into perspective by reminding Arjuna that there's no need to cry for everything, no need to take everything so personally, because there is something higher. There's some higher purpose behind everything. And therefore falling completely into despair and allowing ourselves to be just overwhelmed by emotion is quite clearly not going to help. Also, precisely because of that, whenever our moon is going through some particular affliction, either during the transit of Saturn, during Shani Sadasati, or during the transit of Rahu or Ketu, due to the very same reason, it is advised not to take, very impulsive decisions, because we will have this tendency to act too emotionally in those periods. And this will not bring us anything good, and it may lead to decisions that we can also regret. Which is why it's also generally recommended to avoid also doing readings during those times, during those days when moon is particularly afflicted, because it might be that the person might be overly emotional to actually receive truly. Because if our mind is already full of something, we cannot receive the answer either. That's why even in Prashna Marga is actually advised that whenever a person approaches for a reading, but it's incredibly, incredibly emotional and especially full of negative emotions, we should actually refuse the reading as well, because the person won't be able to benefit from it anyways in this state. And the moon must be receptive for the reading to be able to happen, and there needs to be certain openness present as well. So I'm curious, what are your insights, Dr. Paiji? What you can share with us about the moon?
Oh, this was really fantastic and an eye-opening lesson today, Achalaji. You put it in a nutshell. And the more you were talking about the moon, I was going into a kind of a trance, thinking about the moon and the beauty of the moon. And some of the thoughts which came out when you started with talking about moon and Shukra, it gave me an impression as though, because both of them are, watery planets, and both of them are feminine. So the word Shukra means that which is pure and clear. So Shukra, even in Navagraha Suktam, it says it is Adi Devata and Pratyadi Devata is Indrani and Indra. So I was wondering if the other name of Indra is called as Shakra, very similar sounding like Shukra. Is there any connection? Or Chakra, which means also a wheel. So there could be some connections with that. And Shukra means pure drinking water. As you said, all the flowing rivers, Venus is like the flowing rivers, which are, drinking waters, which provide us water. We cannot take the salt water of the ocean, which is the moon. So you can see there is a difference with salt water and fresh water. So Shukra is the fresh water, and moon is the salt water. So that's why you see Chandra, as you mentioned, even in the avastas of the Chandra can go through the ebb and the fall, the rise and the fall of the high tide and the low tide of the oceans that happen. So all water bodies will experience that at the lunar pull. And that's why I feel when we say about the Krishna's clean mantra, which is Kam Bij mantra, it's a thing of attraction, magnetism. It's trying to attract so that things can really come to the surface like an ebb.
Mm.
And moon and Mercury are two planets which I observe are the only planets which has their exaltation and their Mula Trikona in the same Rashi, which is Taurus is both,
Yes.
and for Budh. And both of them are called as Atreyas because they belong to the lineage of Atri Rishi and Anusuya Devi.
Mm.
So even if you know the other children of Atri Rishi is Dattatreya and Krishnatreya, who's Durvasa Rishi. Somebody told me it is actually the name of Durvasa in India. V is also pronounced as Ba in many parts of the world. And somebody told me it is not Durvasa, it is Durbhasha. Bhasha means his speech is always dreaded because he can really very easily, and he can curse anybody. So you see this principle of Atreyas can be Dattatreya, which is more Satwik. Chandratreya is more like Rajasic, and Durvasa, or he's called as Krishnatreya, he is very tamasic. So three children of Atri Rishi, and his son of thing is also called as a Saumya, Budh. So I see a lot of this connection that you have brought in beautifully today. And one more thing that also came to my mind as you were speaking about the moon is there is so much to learn about how the avastas can be felt. And if you know, moon feels dead in the eighth house, the natural eighth house of Kala Purusha, which is also connected to death, which is Scorpio.
Yes.
He feels more exalted in the second house of family, food, nourishment, nurturing. His own house is the fourth house of the mother, with the motherly quality. So interestingly, we see that he feels dead when he comes into Scorpio, which is the most hidden sign.
Yes.
And, it is more to do with, I feel, your subconscious mind. Moon delves very much into the subconscious, and our conscious training is based on our subconscious, what is stored, what is reservoir. So water is like a reservoir. Even in the Navagraha Suktam, for the moon, the Adidevata is Apa, which is Ambu or water. And the Pratyadi Devata is Gauri, as you mentioned, Mahagauri.
Yes.
Gauri means the fairest of the fairest, just like milk. She's fair as the milk, as they say. So I think all those aspects you've covered. So, I think moon is very less understood, and that is why he is also called as Shashi. And Shashi also, there is a rabbit on the moon, which is, see that as a rabbit is a Shashi. So he's called Shashidhara as well. And you see the connection there. But as you also mentioned, Saturn also in the Panchamaha Purusha yogas, it is called as, the yoga that comes. Exactly. It is the rabbit. So the Saturn has the ability to, make the rabbit feel agitated. So when the rabbit is agitated, it wants to run away. And that's also one more thing that you beautifully mentioned is how Saturn and Moon conjunction can make you feel that you have not lived your childhood because you had to take responsibilities very soon in your life.
Yes.
So yeah, I think I can connect with a lot of these themes, Achalaji. It was wonderfully, presented. I want to thank you for that. What are any other comments or any other thoughts that you wanted to share with the viewers?
Well, when you just mentioned now about the little rabbit that is out there on the moon, I just thought, how accurate is that we truly, can see this shape out there because actually the moon is the fastest of all. And actually the mind is also the fastest, you could say, facility that we have inside of us. And that's the thing, like when I'm thinking about the moon, it really brings, to my imagination this image of a really, really small child, which is just restless, running left and right. And I'm sure that any of the viewers who ever had children, how hard it is to make the child occupied, with something for a longer period of time. And the mind is exactly the same, which is also, I feel, why sometimes just uplifting the energy of the moon while it's, how to say, so in some way afflicted, is not that easy, because it really requires practice. It cannot be like changed just like that. And the thing is that if moon naturally gravitates towards some direction, towards some graha, based on its association, aspects, rashis, anything of that sort, it won't be as easy to change it, because mind is fickle. That's the fact. And that's something that my Gurudev, he's always laughing about. He's often saying in his satsangs, you might be listening to me right now, but your mind might be on the moon, or somewhere else. Just because you're listening doesn't mean that you are actually present, because mind might be somewhere else. And truly, it's not easy actually to transform it, to subdue it in some way. Even in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, at some point, Arjuna is expressing that to Krishna, and he says, but Krishna, how it seems very, very difficult to subdue this mind, because it seems to be harder than actually to subdue the wind, or to catch the wind in a way. So we can imagine it truly is like that, because you try to catch something very fast, you try to change it, which is why I believe really, really strongly, because moon being this powerful significator also of inner healing, because like you mentioned, so Dr. Paiji, there is this other name of moon as well, Soma, the one who is gentle, nourishing, can rejuvenate the body. But it can happen only when we do something completely opposite to what this moon naturally would want to do, which means we cannot just keep overstimulating ourselves, but just stop for a moment and just focus on your breath and be present in the body and be aware of the sensations that they are coming through you, but without naming them, without identifying yourself with them, without trying to intellectualize them or catch them or stop them, even anything of that sort, but just to be with them, simply speaking, and just embrace them and see how they are coming. And I truly believe that, especially when we kind of meditate with this beautiful aspect of Divine Mother, any aspect of Divine Mother, in fact, we somehow unconsciously reteach our mind how to also be like that, how to manifest this healthy archetype of a mother through us in our own relationship to our feelings, to our experiences. One extremely beautiful thing that I heard some time ago is it was in relation to the question was how to deal with like these really difficult emotions that sometimes we experience, because every one of us sooner or later in life will experience some very difficult things. And the answer that the person gave was like very, very touching. She said that, whenever any type of unwanted, in a way, or very difficult emotion comes to you, you should really embrace it like a child and really, really, in a way, interact with it as you would interact with a small child, because that's your mind, that is your child. In fact, it is your own creation. So you treat it like a child. And of course, when a small child comes, runs to you, crying or being very angry and frustrated, you don't reject that child, right? You don't say to it to stop crying. You don't want to change it. You realize that from the child's perspective, it's a big deal, big drama. But at the same time, you realize that from a bigger perspective, adult perspective or divine perspective in this case, it's not as big as it actually feels right now. So from this level, you allow yourself to just embrace this feeling and let it be. Show your love and support, but Don't attach to it. Don't try to change it. Don't identify with it. Realize it's separate from you. In other words, realize what is you, even in the first place, and what is just the feeling and thought that goes through you. I personally believe that so many of our life problems really emerge from the fact that we take our thoughts for granted. We kind of automatically believe that whatever we think is true. It's actually crazy if you think about that, you know? Like how can you possibly believe that everything you think must be true, that every opinion that we have in our mind is just true? We never stop for a moment and question, but wait a moment, is it actually true? Is it truly that way? And I think that's the thing with the moon. It actually never goes retrograde. You know, it never questions itself. It just keeps going, you know, and keeps creating all those little universes in our own mind. But that's the thing, when we like to stop for a moment and we just stop being so identified and attached and realize, okay, here is me. Maybe I cannot define myself, but at least I know that the thoughts, the feelings, and everything else I experience, it's separate from me. It's not actually me. I'm the experiencer of those things. And this is why I strongly believe that reading Bhagavad Gita can be so incredibly helpful for people who go through those difficult emotions. Because in 13th chapter, Krishna actually explains so beautifully that the difference between the observer, the one who experiences, and that which is being experienced, the field. And we always think that, oh, the field is just the 5 elements and all that we experience in the outside, but there is also the inner field that we experience, the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions. They are all a very important part of our life, but they are not identical with us, which means they do not necessarily need to define us. And I think that this is very often like a really good beginning towards healing the moon and healing the inner child, just realizing that whatever we feel or think, it does not necessarily need to define us. And I think it's a very, very important point to always remember, especially if we go through some difficult things in life.
And also to add to what you've been saying, Achalaji, there's another thing about the moon that I have always observed. You can only see one side of the moon. Always. We are not able to see the other side of the moon, which is called the darker side of the moon. So mind has both sides. So which side is what you are showing? You might have a darker side, which you might not show. And there's always the brighter side you show, which is the face of the moon that we can see from the earth. And how the moon is locked with the earth is that no matter wherever you are on the earth, you will only see one side of the moon. So which means there is also this unknown part of the moon, or the mind, as we say. That is one thing. Second thing, even the story of the entire life of Sri Krishna is a representation of the moon. So mind was kind of born in the prison, and he started making miracles as soon as he was born. Krishna was born in the prison, so mind was born in the prison, and you see the prison gates open. Everybody is kind of into a slumber, and he crosses the Yamuna, which is again, water is again a symbol of, then, childhood, his love for dairy products, butter and other forms of dairy products, again milk, with the cows, as a gopala, as a cow herd. So you see his life itself and all the different asuras that he slayed, first 12 years, can also give an indication how the mind has to control various animalistic instincts within us. For example, right from Putana, who's the motherly, the demoness who came to poison him with breast milk. From there to all the different asuras like Bakasura, which is the crane. Then you had the asura, which is like the donkey. Then we had the horse demon. We had the calf demon, Vatsasura. Shakadasura, which is the cart demon. So you see,
Heart
all
demon.
of these are a manifestation of saying that we have these. We can sometimes be like a horse, we can be sometimes like a calf, we can be, and those are the impulses which he slays. And you see, even Kalyanaga,
Mm.
he also slays a python. Python
Mm.
comes in the form of a. So you see, there are various asuras being sent towards him to slay him right from his childhood. But every time he has, even there was a tornado which wanted to, take him up and drop him down and kill him. So what I want to say is, if you read the childhood days of Sri Krishna, is all about the kind of miracles that he has done and the so many demons and asuras that he has slayed. He is saying how your mind can go into these things and you can really slay those problems that are there within you.
Mm. That's very beautiful, Dr. Paiji, and it's actually such a beautiful even sadhana to read about the childhood of Krishna. When there's any affliction of the moon,
Yes.
even actually sign of Taurus is called Gokula. It's actually one of its names, the
Yeah.
birthplace of Krishna, and also if we think about that in Naisargika Dasha, actually moon rules the very first year of our life, especially when we are these small children. So it's really, really beautiful.
So there are so many similarities you see with Krishna's life and with the moon. So that is a beautiful mantra you've given there, which is the best way to train your moon in any avastha. It is Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha, because you are
Yeah.
attracting Krishna into your life so that he gives you the ability to slay any problems that are creating a problem for your mind. And as you said, reading the Bhagavad Gita. See, as
Mm.
everybody says, the Bhagavad Gita was given on the battlefield,
Mm.
and the Rashi which is associated with battlefield and with Vidya and with this is both Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the battlefield, Sagittarius is also the highest knowledge that you can gain. So Gita was given not inside the palace or not in a gurukul or an ashram. Gita was recited on the battlefield. Life is like a battlefield. We are battling every day, and Krishna giving him that means this is the highest form that we can use to control all the warriors that come, the wars that we fight in our life on a daily
Yeah.
basis. So we have to think why Gita was not given anywhere else. It was only given on the battlefield. That is the highest form, which is Sagittarius sign. Because Sagittarius is also
Mm.
Guru, Sagittarius is also the battlefield.
Mm. And it makes so much sense, no? Because truly, I believe strongly that actually the moments in life through which we learn the most is through these battles actually that we are going. This is where this mind, the moon, is literally pushed to go out of the comfort zone. And if we think about it, we can be in fact so grateful right now to Arjuna that he had this depression and frustration, because without him there wouldn't be any Bhagavad Gita.
Absolutely.
And we can also look like that, I believe, at many of our own personal battles and challenges. Sooner or later, we will overcome them. We will learn something from that. It might be a little piece of wisdom, but you never know how this little piece of wisdom, what it may contribute to other person's life. The day when you will share it, when you will feel like sharing it. So especially think, like I would say, going out of ourselves for a moment and really looking and understanding that our battles are not just for us, but they are also for others as well, because we can inspire others as well through them. It's something very, very beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, Achala that's been a very wonderful session. Thank you very much for taking your precious time and coming and sharing these nuggets of information. All our viewers are really overwhelmed. They love this series. So we invite you to come and share for every planet or every graha. Such small nuggets will definitely help us. And it's not about doing complex remedies, including healing can be done with these simple ones. I would again reiterate to people, keep life simple. as somebody said, keep it stupid. So the simpler the life is,
Yes.
and easier it is. You don't want to do 100 mantras, just do one mantra,
Yes.
100,000 times instead of doing 100,000 mantras one time. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very
I
much.
absolutely agree with you, Dr. Paiji. Yeah.
Okay. Namaste. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Namaste.